It begins, that endless noise inside you, never stopping, never silent. Sometimes you call it thinking. Other times you call it analysis. But most of the time, it is nothing more than the echo of your own ego. Because the ego hates silence. It fears emptiness. For in silence, it must face itself. Ibn Arabi said, "The heart does not speak. The heart only listens. What speaks is either the ego or the Lord." But the moment you hear something within, you immediately follow it. Because we rarely question the voices inside us. We weigh every word that comes from the outside, but we treat every inner sentence as truth. Yet most of those voices are nothing but fears, traces of the past, echoes of your anxieties about the future. The mind keeps talking because something remains unresolved. A wound is still open, a desire still alive, a fear still greater than you. And the more you try to stay quiet, the louder the noise becomes. Because the ego believes that if you are silent, it will die. So it keeps you busy. It makes you think, plan, count endless possibilities. It never lets you stay in the now. It drags you back to the past, pushes you ahead to the future, but never leaves you here. Because in the present, there is God. And the moment the ego senses God's presence, it must retreat. But it does not want to. So it speaks. It wears you down. It makes you forget. According to Ibn Arabi, whenever the inner voice makes you feel tight and heavy, know that its source is not God. Because God's voice does not constrict. God's voice does not terrify. It awakens. It shakes you but never destroys you. It speaks, but it never shouts. And most often, it is heard in silence. This is why those close to truth become quiet. They do not speak much, because they know. Every word can be a veil. Every explanation can be a distance. And sometimes, silence itself is the highest form of prayer. But the human heart is rarely ready for silence, because silence is like standing before a mirror. There, you see yourself, without excuse, without escape, without distraction. And in that moment, you will either call upon God, or you will run from yourself. Inside you there is an emptiness, a hollow you cannot fill. And that emptiness begins to speak. If no sound rises, you cannot bear it. So you turn on music. You check your phone. You write to someone. But all of it is just an attempt not to hear the emptiness. Yet that emptiness is the very place of meeting with your Lord. For when everything is full, He does not come. He manifests only in emptiness, because He cannot be contained. He can only appear in a heart that has fallen silent. Ibn Arabi said, "When the mind falls silent, the heart begins to hear." When you stop speaking, not only with your tongue, but when even the commentary inside you falls silent, then the voice of truth can be heard. That voice is not a sentence. It is not advice. Sometimes it is only stillness. But that stillness is so deep that even if you read 1,000 books, you would not find it. And in that moment, the true transformation begins, because you are no longer speaking. You are only listening. Listening to what? To everything. The fall of a leaf, the laughter of a child, the whisper of the wind. And in each of them, you search for His trace. But the mind resists. The mind wants control. It wants to explain, to define. Yet sometimes meaning only comes when you stop trying to explain. It must be felt, not analyzed. The mind talks endlessly because it has not surrendered. Every word is resistance. Every story is an escape. Every calculation is a fear, and all of it keeps you far from truth. Do you know what happens when the mind finally goes quiet? You no longer condemn yourself. You no longer glorify yourself. You simply are. As you are. Imperfect. Searching. Silent. And this state is when the heart is closest to God. because in that moment, you don't need to know anything. You don't need to solve anything. You simply stay still, and that stillness becomes your most eloquent voice. You say, "My mind never stops." Maybe God is telling you, just once, be silent, truly silent, and be alone with me. But you cannot hear it. Because inside you, a new scenario starts every moment. A new past reopens. A new future is drawn. And your heart, in all that noise, waits like a lonely child, waiting for you to pause, waiting for you to listen, waiting for you to understand. But you keep speaking, not only with your tongue, but within yourself, with your inner voice. Yet that voice is no longer yours. It pulls you away from yourself. It does not tell your truth anymore. It only tells your fears. Do you know what happens if one day you truly fall silent? At first, you will feel discomfort because your mind is not used to it. An emptiness appears inside, and at first you mistake that emptiness for a lack. But it is not lack. It is the threshold of divine closeness. If you can step across that threshold, everything changes. You change, because it is no longer the mind that speaks, but the heart that hears. And a heart that hears recognizes the voice of God, wordless, without echo, yet fully present. As long as the mind keeps talking, you can never hear fully, because it always interrupts. But if one day you truly fall silent, you will discover that there has always been another voice within you, waiting for your silence. Because that voice only opens in stillness. And when it comes, you no longer search for answers. Because all your questions have already fallen quiet. Have you ever had such a moment? A moment where you did not think, did not plan, did not form a single sentence, but simply sat and waited? And though no voice came, a peace spread through you. If you have ever lived such a moment, that was God's first gift to you. Because in that silence, when the mind falls silent, the heart begins to hear. But what it hears is not words, not advice, not knowledge, not the product of reason. It is a state, a nearness, a subtle touch. Ibn Arabi said, "The heart listens, but it cannot speak, because it holds the essence of meaning." That is why the heart does not explain. It only turns, it only inclines. And when that turning begins, you no longer wish to explain anything, because you want not so much to understand, but to witness. Inside you, a door opens. You do not know when it opened, nor how, but suddenly you realize, there is another speaking to you, greater than you, yet the one who makes you who you are. This is what we call the Lord, and He does not speak in words. He surrounds you with His presence. In the center of silence, when the mind is quiet, the heart is no longer empty space. It becomes a place of divine manifestation. And you are no longer empty either, yet you are not full. You are simply open. And that openness fills only to the measure you can hold. Ibn Arabi said, "Manifestation is according to the vessel's capacity. The more silent you are, the more open you become, and the more you can hear. But if the mind interferes, you close again. Because the mind always longs to reduce everything into a single sentence. But God is not a sentence. He is not a formula. He is not certainty. He is being itself. For the mind to be silent is for you to join that being, to release control, to release meaning, to stop explaining, not to be like stone, but to be like water, because stone resists, but water lets go. It spreads everywhere. It takes every shape, yet its essence never changes. And so the heart becomes like water. Silence turns it into a flowing river, and it inclines wherever God wills. Where the mind is quiet, questions lose their weight. You no longer ask, why? You no longer ask, what will happen? You only watch. You only perceive. And that perception itself is worship. For Ibn Arabi taught, The greatest worship is to remain in awareness. But that awareness cannot be reached by thinking. It is reached by silence. Whenever you are silent, you begin to hear. And this hearing is not with your ears. It is with the depth of your heart. Suddenly, you know things, but you were never taught them. You never memorized them. You only felt them. This is the knowledge that flows through the gate of Ilm Ladun, the hidden knowledge from God. And that gate opens only through silence, not through words, not through reading, through silence. Because words are veils. Every word chooses one meaning and leaves the others outside. But silence remains open to all meanings. That is why truth does not hide in words, it hides in silence. When the mind is silent, something rises from within you. Sometimes it is tears, sometimes it is peace, sometimes it is simply eyes filling without a single word. This is the moment when the heart touches God, and that touch cannot be expressed with any sentence, but you recognize it, because it does not belong to you, yet it was created for you. Ibn Arabi said, "Every servant carries a manifestation unique to himself. That manifestation does not exist in another. That is why your silence is never like anyone else's. The door that opens in your stillness belongs only to you, and what you witness there is your Lord. What He tells you in that silence, you cannot explain to anyone, because to explain is always to diminish. That is why the people of truth do not speak much. Whatever they say would always fall short. And sometimes saying nothing is to say everything. The mind cannot understand this point, because the mind wants to explain, but the heart only wants to carry. When the mind falls silent, a mercy begins to bloom, toward yourself and toward others. Because now you no longer want to correct anyone. You no longer want to explain anything. For every soul carries its own path, and that path only opens through silence. It is not your telling that opens it. It is their silence that does. This is why truth is open to everyone, yet visible to few. The mind speaks, but the heart recognizes. And whenever you fall silent, and as silence deepens, things begin to open within you. Know that this is your inner door, and behind that door lies what was always kept only for you. You cannot enter there with anyone else. You cannot reach it with knowledge. You can only cross with silence. And once you do, the world no longer looks the same. People no longer speak to you the same. Time no longer flows the same, because now, in everything, you begin to hear Him. When the mind falls silent, what you see does not change, but the one who sees is changed. You are no longer the observer. You are the observed. And that turning is the greatest awakening. When the mind is silent, peace begins to arrive. But at first, an emptiness appears. And this emptiness is often frightening, because all the sentences your mind has repeated for years now grow quiet. Every accusation against yourself, every judgment of others begins to dissolve, and you are left bare. No excuses, no defenses. But that bareness is not something to fear, because God loves you most in that very state. Ibn Arabi said, "The servant comes to God stripped bare, no knowledge in his hand, no defense on his lips, only surrender." And in that silence the ego tries to speak one last time. It whispers fear. It tells you, silence is emptiness. Silence is loneliness. But it does not know that in silence there is God. And to be alone with God is deeper than any crowd. At a certain point, the questions begin to fade. You no longer ask, what will happen? You no longer ask, am I doing it right? Because now an inner peace whispers that everything is already in its place. This whisper cannot be captured in words, yet it is a voice, and it reveals itself only to the one who listens. And then you realize God has always been speaking to you, but you had never stopped. While your mind was chasing answers, He was already there, but your noise had drowned out His stillness. According to Ibn Arabi, the heart hears not when it is ready, but when it is silent. For readiness is the work of the mind, but silence is the act of surrender. When you no longer struggle, when you stop trying to change things, when you simply accept what is, that state is the heart opening to God. And in that opening, everything transforms at once. Fear begins to fade. Jealousy loses its meaning. Competition becomes pointless, because now you know you are with Him and He is enough. Silence of the mind does not mean thinking nothing. It means laying everything down and finding yourself in the very center, no longer burdened by the past, no longer anxious for the future. There is only the present moment. And the present is the center of the entire universe. The present is where God most fully dwells, because it transcends time. And the heart reaches timelessness only through silence. When the mind falls silent, not only thoughts grow quiet, but desires too. You no longer say, "It must happen." You say, "If it happens, it is beautiful. If it does not, its beauty is not lost." This is gnosis, marifa. It goes beyond knowledge. For Ibn Arabi said, "Knowledge speaks, gnosis is silent." Because gnosis is not the state of the knower. It is the state of being one with the known. You no longer carry knowledge. You have become the known. You are no longer the one who hears. You are the one who is heard. And in that state, if you speak at all, you speak only on behalf of God, because you are gone. Only He remains. Only He is seen. Only He is felt. From this point on, a person does not try to change himself, because he has already been transformed. He does not fight the mind, because the mind itself has become a companion. He does not resent the ego, because even the ego has become a servant. And the world is no longer a burden. It is a mirror. Every event tells you something. Every person shows you yourself, and every silence reminds you of God. When the mind is silent, the heart becomes a mirror of truth. Whoever looks into it sees his own depth, and in that depth there is nothing but God. Even you are no longer there. You have vanished. But this vanishing is not destruction. It is union, because when you disappear, He appears, and yourself dissolves into His oneness. Ibn Arabi called this state fana, the station of annihilation. But this annihilation is not a loss. It is a meeting. The moment the mind falls silent, that meeting begins, because your words have ended, and His reality begins. Yet He does not speak. He simply is, and you witness His being. In every breath, in every glance, in every moment. And this witnessing is worship in its purest form, without saying anything, without asking for anything, simply standing still and beholding Him. That is why, when the mind is silent, the heart does not speak either. The heart too becomes silent. But this silence is not a closing. It is an opening. You are no longer shut off. You are open to every word, to every state, to every sound, because you no longer judge. You simply recognize. And in everything you recognize, you see Him. And when you see Him, you need nothing else. When the mind is silent, no one can give you anything, because you already contain everything. So if one day you can truly be silent, and even learn to love that silence, know that you too have opened to Him, and this opening may last a lifetime. But such silence is not muteness, it is depth. And whoever looks at you will feel a weight in you. But that weight is not a burden, it is peace.